Hello. In this chapter, we are going to talk about a matter of great relevance for the world economy. Since the beginning of the year 2022, the dollar has been rising in price against all other currencies aggressively. In this graph of the euro against the dollar, the downward trend of recent years can be observed, as well as the historical record currently reached, with the euro at 97 cents. And this trend is similar in all other major altcoins to the dollar. An expensive dollar is extremely bad for the world economy, including the US economy. And in that video, we are going to analyze why an expensive one can worsen the economic crisis that we see today. Under non-interventionist conditions, a rise in the value of the dollar would be a symptom of a growing economy with little unemployment and a lot of abundance. The price of currencies are determined by supply and demand, and when a country's economy is strong, foreign investors buy a lot of that currency to make investments in the country. In the same way, a strong one would be a symptom that the country is exporting in large quantities, since more exports means more demand for the currency, which translates into a stronger one. But this is not the case in the United States. The US economy has been in crisis since July 2022. In this graph, you will see that in the last 2 quarters, the economic crisis is obvious, with a recession. In addition, the price of all things has skyrocketed. There is less economic movement than before, and many companies are laying off their workers. And as for exports, the trade balance of the United States, that is, the difference between its exports and imports, although the United States has been in a chronic deficit for decades, said deficit has worsened since the pandemic. Therefore, the United States is importing far more than it is exporting. In conclusion, all the traditional indicators tell us that the US economy is in trouble. So that brings us to the big question. So why is the dollar so expensive? There are 2 possibilities. The first, which is the global economic situation, forces this situation. Almost all governments in the world have their reserves in dollars. In this graph, you will see that 60% of the money of world governments is in them. The reason? Because the dollar is the most powerful currency. Almost all natural resources are sold in them, from oil to basic grains. In the same way, the United States is the largest economy in the world, and all countries export products and services to it. Therefore, it is convenient for countries to have their reserves mostly in dollars, and when the world economy is in crisis, most countries sell local currencies to buy them. In other words, in times of global crisis, the American currency is a refuge, and that is exactly what is happening. We are living in very delicate times in the world economy. The war in Ukraine caused a chaos in the prices of oil, natural gas, and basic grains. That is why governments and investors have been selling their euros, yen, and other currencies to buy dollars. Until the economic situation improves, there is more demand for them, which explains the rise of the dollar against other currencies. But there is another explanation, interventionist, for the expensive dollar, and that is the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve determines how many dollars are going to be printed, and also how expensive dollar debts are going to be through federal funds rate. Normally, when many of them are printed, the price of the American currency goes down. That was what happened in the pandemic. But now the Federal Reserve is doing the opposite. It has stopped printing and is making debts in dollars have higher interest rates by drastically raising federal funds rate, as you will see in this graph. This usually leads to an economic slowdown, since all debts have higher interest, and this causes companies and individuals to lend less money, which slows down the economy of the US. This makes the global economic situation even worse, since the United States is the largest one in the world. This gives investors all the more reason to exchange their weaker local currencies for American one, than to hold more expensive dollar debt. This also motivates investors to take their money to the United States, since if they lend that money they would receive higher interest. This is a vicious circle. The global economic situation is uncertain and difficult. Investors move their money to the dollar, but the Federal Reserve worsens this situation by raising federal funds rate, which makes the American currency even more expensive, and it is for these two reasons that we see a dollar way too high today. We break briefly for a possible commercial that I hope you find useful, and to tell you that if these videos are useful to you, your support of the channel by subscribing, liking and sharing it would help us a lot. Thank you. Why an expensive dollar is bad for the world economy. There are three key elements. Let's start with the debts. Many countries in the world have their debts in dollars. If the American currency rises in value against the ones of that country, this makes said debt more expensive in terms of the local one. The dollar rising in value against local ones on average 30%, and since many of these countries have their debts in dollars, that means that their debts have risen 30% in relation to their local currency. This is something terrible for the economy of your countries, because your governments are going to have to find a way to raise their income to be able to pay the interest on said debt. Obviously, the same applies to companies and individuals in those countries. If your debts are in dollars, this means that these debts have increased in value. Therefore, an expensive dollar for these countries, companies, and people is a headache. The second key to why an expensive American currency is dangerous for the world economy is because of the inflation. The vast majority of countries in the world import oil, metals and other natural resources, and almost all these natural resources are valued in dollars. This means that they have also risen in price in relation to other currencies, but this logic also applies to all imports made in dollars, such as iPhones, cars, and thousands of other products as they are valued in them. That means that if you import them and the currency of your country has lost value against the dollar, everything becomes much more expensive, and this worsens the high inflation that we already see today in the whole world. So those who lose out when there is an expensive dollar are the consumers who import things. Finally, the last clue as to why a dear dollar is dangerous for the world economy is that it further slows down the US economy. Although the United States imports much more than it exports, this does not mean that the United States is not an exporting country. The United States is the second largest exporter in the world, and its companies are the largest exporting ones. By having a more expensive dollar, that means that the importers of their products are going to start buying fewer things, and now that we are in an economic crisis, this makes the situation even worse. Therefore, a dear American currency has direct effects on the US economy. If companies export less, this means that their profits will be lower and they will have to adapt by laying off employees or stop growing. Therefore, an expensive dollar is actually very poisonous for everyone. Thank you for watching. Greetings.